Is Brooks of Sports by Brooks, and we are on the air in Los Angeles as we are every weekday, noon Eastern time. And today, got a great show for you coming up as shortly with Chad Finn of the Boston Globe, sports media columnist, also, of course, Boston.com. Andrew Brandt, former longtime NFL executive with the Packers and the Business of Sports podcast, which is, one of the top 2 or 3 NFL podcasts, I think, out there. And I said NFL podcast, not just sports business. Andrew Brandt will join us coming up later in the show. And we're going to talk about this situation with Josh Shaw of the Cardinals, which you may or may not be aware of. But it's a big deal. To me, it is. And going forward, it could be a precedent-setting situation. So we're going to talk to Andrew Brandt about that. He's an expert on these things as an attorney, as an executive in the NFL, dealing with these kinds. Shaw has been given this ridiculous draconian punishment where he's season after he outed himself, admitting at the Caesars Sportsbook when he placed a bet against his own team, I might add, that he was an NFL player. So bizarre situation, but not so far. I think if you understand what's happening in the United States today, and that's important. It's important to know the past, how we look at gambling. But before I get back into that, also want to let you know, coming up, senior NFL columnist for CBS Sports, Pete Prisco, will join us for the first time. Excited to have him on for the first time. Guy, Chad Finn, Andrew Brandt have been on before, friends of the show. Lots of friends of the show. You're a friend of the show. And because you're a friend of the show, I'll let you know what I'm hearing. And I want everybody to know that I was wrong about James Franklin. And we got the confirmation yesterday from Mike Bone on his Twitter account, the director at USC, telling us what his bosses told him to do and say, which is fine. That's how it works in college sports. That's how ADs operate for the most part, almost all of them. They don't make the decisions. The decision was made for him. And the situation specifically was James Franklin did not agree to become the head coach at USC. So because USC didn't have a home run hire in hand, I know they were talking to other candidates that included, I might add, high distance, and I'll throw one name at you that I know for a fact USC had reached out to about their head coaching position. And that's Tony Elliott, the assistant coach at Clemson, who does have some Southern California ties. And Elliott has been one of those guys who's been raiding Southern California on behalf of Clemson. And I would say right now, if there's a number one guy out there when it comes to assistant coaches in college football lined up for a job, it would be Tony Elliott. And if Gus Malzahn goes to Arkansas, which I'm hearing is a 50-50 proposition. I heard that as of yesterday, and I think we'll get some more clarity on that in the next few days or weeks. We're going to find out here shortly what Gus Malzahn is going to do, because the national media is not reporting this. That's why you're watching this show. But trust me when I tell you, it is by no means a given that Malzahn will be back. Beating Alabama in the way they beat Alabama, look, it was a weird game. It wasn't like, well, Auburn's back. Here they come. They're taking over that rivalry. They're going to be a force in no, it wasn't like that. We both saw the game. All of us saw it. And that's a big deal. It's not that it's a bad thing they won the game. It's just that the team is okay. And you don't really see an ascendant team. You don't really see an ascendant situation there. So with his close ties to the state of Arkansas, which are significant with Malzahn, I think that would be for both parties, a good situation. If Malzahn's going to become an elite coach, he probably has a better chance in Arkansas, even though obviously you've got the very difficult divisional situation. But remember, these things can turn. And when you look at Saban, when you look at his age, that situation, if Alabama ends up having Saban maybe retire in the next year or two, whatever it is, few years, and they're not able to secure Dabo, which I think they will, but if they don't get Dabo Swinney, Alabama's in trouble. And LSU, by no means. I like LSU. Who doesn't right now? I love Coach O. Who doesn't? I remember him well when I covered the team out here in Los Angeles when he was at SC. And it's a shame he ended up as the head coach. But let's not get carried away about LSU. I mean, you got a guy in Joe Brady is the guy behind the curtain. It certainly appears. It's kind of hard not to conclude that a combination Burrow and Joe Brady, that's LSU right now. Coach O, let's pump the brakes a little bit. We all love him, but let's pump the brakes just a little bit. So with Burrow, remember last year, I mean, he was pedestrian. Granted, he didn't have a great offense. He didn't have any offense. He didn't have any coherent scheme. And that's the MO of LSU. That's the way it's been forever. But now you bring in, I mean, what's the difference with Burrow this year? Why did Ohio State want him? Why did LSU take him? We now know. But it took putting that offensive scheme in, that passing game in from Joe Brady that made it happen. So quite literally, one guy has turned the whole thing around, and he's not a full-time outright coordinator on that staff. Now, you can bet that there are programs out there who want to add him as their coordinator, including Texas, Tom Herman at Texas. As I reported yesterday, Graham Harrell could be in line for that job. We talked to RJ Young out of Oklahoma yesterday, got his assessment of it. And he told us that if that were to happen, Harrell specifically, it would really indicate that Herman's leverage in terms of hiring people is mitigated and in decline. And why wouldn't it be? Of course. But Harrell and Herman might not be the best of friends. It might not be a great arrangement when it comes to a relationship. Brady might be a different situation, but there's nothing I would imagine that LSU wouldn't do to keep Brady short of naming him head coach, right? So Brady's the key at LSU. You've got the situation at Alabama, which, to be quite honest, and this is all in the context of going to Arkansas, if you're Malzahn, because people always say, wow, the West Division East. I mean, these things change. What Saban has done in the SEC, it's in my lifetime, that's unprecedented. It's never been done, what he's doing. And he's long in the tooth, and there's some cracks here and there. I'm not saying they can't come back. Speaking of coming back, so to wrap up Malzahn, just keep your eye on that. Keep your eye on it. Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if Malzahn ends up at Arkansas and everybody's like, woo, well, you know in advance what's going on. So, but when it comes to Alabama, when it comes to coming back, right? Saban's coming back next year. It certainly appears that he's coming back. But what about Tua? Kirk Herbstreit, our guy, friend of the show, been on Sports by Brooks on Fancred before, will come on again, probably have him on. I'm thinking the week maybe after conference championship when things calm down for him. What is he doing right now? Well, he's interviewing Tua in Tuscaloosa about his future and making news. So our producer Cam Smith today here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred, we've got a clip of that interview that we edited it down where Tua talks about with the catastrophic injuries that he's suffered recently with a hip and all the other stuff, he might come back next year and play for Alabama. So when you get a chance, Cam, can you run that clip from the interview with Herbstreit and Tua this week about Tua talking about coming back to Alabama next year? Okay, we don't have the clip of okay. Do we have that clip? Sorry about that. Go ahead and hit me up with a text when we get a chance or whatever works, Cam. Thanks.
I think you got to think of both sides of the spectrum. You think of risk reward on, coming back. You think of risk reward on leaving, and when I kind of look at it, I look at it, if I come back, the risk is, what if I get hurt again? But the reward could be, maybe I jump back to the top of the charts, on the boards, for all these teams. Now you look at the other side of the spectrum, if I leave, the risk is, do I still go in the first round? Or, do I even make it to the second round? And, I mean, these guys don't even know, if I can play with, the hip injury yet, too. And then, I'd say the reward and all of that is, yeah, I'll be getting paid millions, but, I mean, a lot of the money that I could have made, you can't make that money up now. I think you got to think of both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. I don't know who's telling him he's going to go in the second round. There's no chance he's going to the second round. So to even suggest that is outrageous and insane. There's no chance. First of all, there's no chance he should, or there's no reason he should be involved with the combine. He should just sit out and let the Patriots draft him at the end of the first round because he will get snapped up in the first round. The issue for me with him is something that I think is the most undercovered story in the NFL year after year. And that is the chronic injuries that players suffer in the NFL at a very early age because of the way their injuries are treated or not treated or how they're treated in college, especially at the high-profile programs. You may remember a long time ago when college baseball, even though it's big, if you're a big-time prospect now, you go straight to pro baseball and you're in the majors pretty quickly. It wasn't always that way, and you had a lot of prospects that would go through college baseball, pitchers in particular. And you may remember, this is a while ago, but we had a string of pitchers who burned their arms out playing college baseball, where they would pitch every other game or in relief, things like that. It's a similar principle. I think when you look at a guy, a great example would be Todd Gurley, right? And the issues he had at Georgia, which are well chronicled injury-wise, and now what he's suffering, and how it's this sort of mysterious thing. We can't pin it down. It's mysterious because our is mysterious. You never know when it's going to, you're going to wake up with it. It comes and goes. And that's what he's dealing with. Why is a guy that age dealing with arthritis? Well, and now you look at a guy like Tua, and I can't remember a guy in high-profile college football. There might be somebody, but who had these weird, innovative is what they call it. That's the diplomatic word, where they drill a hole in your femur and they stick these threads through it and they tie it up, and we've got the animation of it, and he's got it done on both ankles now. And now he's got this fracture of his posterior hip wall and, his hip. Holy mackerel. This guy, if ever there was a candidate for somebody to have problems in the future with injury, it's Tua. And The fact that Saban played him in that game, the Mississippi State game, right? Which I still can't believe he did that. Even Tim Tebow said he shouldn't, of all people, right? That's a shocker. The fact that he would do that, Saban would do that, I would say the last place on earth Tua should be right now is Tuscaloosa if he cares about his future as an NFL player. The last place he should be is Alabama, because Alabama has put him through. It's unbelievable that nobody comment. I mean, this is really, I've talked about this so much on this show, but this is such a great example of how we don't even have a college football media. Everybody just rolls over. The discussion with Tua's situation with Mississippi State, except for this show, was, oh, do we have the right to criticize Nick Saban on this? What? The right to criticize him? Are you kidding me? That's the college football media. That's how they've dumbed everybody down. You're damn straight we do. And it was a huge mistake. And I said it was a huge mistake every day that damn week. And I had gotten reports, inside reports from practice at Alabama, that he was not practicing with the first team. He was not doing team drills throughout the week in practice. It's insane. The reason he played, the only reason he played, again, you're only going to hear it on this show, is because of game control. Game control. Remember that word, those two words, game control. That means margin of victory. They call it game control in the context of, sorry, I've got these text messages coming in. It might be a source. Let's see here. I'll make sure we're good here. Cam Smith, our producer. Cam, I want to let you know that if you've got me, that we need to get in touch with Adam McClintock and move him, if possible, to 140, if that's possible. Adam McClintock, or we can reschedule him for Monday, if possible. And the college football professor, because we want to have him on, but right now, got some things that are fluid. So if you get a chance, thank you very much. So the situation with Tua is, so I was going to say was the reason he played, it's not a mystery if you watch this show, style points, game control, margin of victory, run the score up. Because Alabama's schedule is so terrible, god-awful, a schedule that Nick Saban, I might add, this is not one of those cases where, well, they schedule these games 25 years out. Western Carolina was on the schedule back when Bear Bryant was still coaching. That's when they made this. No. Saban was there. He signed off. And so they were in a position where their schedule was so terrible that they had to beat teams 100-0. That's why when just the fact that Auburn's in the game in the third or fourth quarter means, well, they're done. Doesn't matter now what the result is. They had to beat Auburn by 4 or 5 touchdowns if they were going to have a shot to get into the playoff. That's my opinion. And that's what Professor Adam McClintock told us. Of course, they're going to do what they can. I should say the College Football Rankings Committee, they're going to do whatever they can, right, to give teams like Oklahoma a chance, which is fine. That's the system. That's what they're doing. I wish they would be a little bit more open about it. But when you put Oklahoma State in the top 25 right now, that's a clear sign the committee is fixing it. So Oklahoma is in a position to make the college football playoff. And it's not a coincidence when you look at Joe Castiglione being a member of that voting committee right now, the Oklahoma athletic director. Frank Beamer, son Shane, is on the Oklahoma staff, both on the CFP voting committee for rankings. Why they're even ranking 25 teams, That's bullshit. They shouldn't be. They teams. By having 25 teams, that's where the abuse and the illegitimacy and the questions pop up, because you have the same 20 through 25 for the AP and the coaches poll. Same 20 through 25 right now. Doesn't include Oklahoma State or Kansas State on Oklahoma and Baylor's schedule. And you've got to have a strength of schedule to move up into the college football playoff, to have a shot to leapfrog Utah, right? Absent having a great opponent, which they don't have, or some sort of binary event, which is not going to happen. I mean, Oklahoma's not going to beat Baylor 100-0, and vice versa. So what do you do if you really want Oklahoma in there over Utah? Well, you take Oklahoma State, which is not in that 20 through 25 in either coaches, or, and you slide them into number 25 in your poll, in the college football rankings poll. And if you don't believe me that they're manipulating that, the committee, there's a concerted effort to do that. Watch Rob Mullins on ESPN every week when they ask him, why is this team moving? Why is this team going up, down, sideways, whatever it is? And what is the first thing out of his mouth? Top 25 wins. Well, they have this number of top 25 wins. Right. Okay, so where's Oklahoma State? 25, number 25. Not according to the coaches, not according to the AP, right? And Kansas State's not in any of the polls. And we don't know how close Kansas State is in the college football rankings, college football playoff rankings, because they don't have other votes, which they should. They should tell you how close the other teams are. But that's, again, a lack of transparency. So we've been jumping around here. Coming up, we're going to talk about these NBA ratings. I talked about the NBA ratings on Twitter today, and of course, we cut to the chase and give you the real scoop on what's going on. But we're gonna talk to Chad Finn of the Boston Globe, Boston.com sports media columnist, and about the NBA ratings. And I don't think it's, the NFL ratings, I think, was a different animal, trying to figure it out with the kneeling situation. And in the aftermath, I don't think there's any question. We'll talk to Chad about this. I don't want to go down that road just yet, but we'll talk to Chad about that stuff. Before we talk to Chad, I want to, we're also going to talk to Andrew Brandt coming up about the situation with Josh Shaw and how the NFL is handling that situation, sports betting, football betting, all of that. I want to show you, I think what's happening today with how Shaw's being treated, and how it's not coming up. Nobody's paying attention. You've got the teams now joined at the hip with sportsbooks, with Las Vegas, Caesars, you name it. Why is that happening? It's happening because things have changed. And so if you have that clip, I want to show you a clip from Frontline, the investigative show Frontline. You know that show. From 1989. And this is an hour-long show. This is just the intro. It's about a minute long. So you can see the way we used to approach the NFL and betting here in this country.
Program are adult WDCN TV Nashville, a service of the Metropolitan Board of Public Education. Certain portions of this program are adult in nature.
Adult.
Please use your own judgment about allowing young people
to view it. This is about the NFL.
On Frontline tonight, a story of football.
Music.
But it is not played on the field, nor cheered from the stands. The action of this story takes place off the field. It's a story about bookies. It's a story about the outlaw line.
That guy was murdered, by the way.
Illegal gambling and the mafia.
Is this the Irishman? Where's Joe Pesci? That's the same, by the way, that's the same show that ESPN contracted with to do a big expose on CTE that ESPN pulled out of at the last second. Remember that? Same investigative show. So in some ways, those guys really haven't changed to an extent. But you don't see that today. No, because of the media. It's not so much the NFL. The NFL is only going to go as far as the media will let them. And the media is now in bed financially with the casinos all across the country. And it's only going to get deeper and deeper. And that's fine. I got no problem with sports gambling, but absolutely no problem with it. And to a certain extent, you could make the argument that what we have today is better than back then and in the past. But I think you need to understand what I can do for you guys today is I can give you a quick little history. We're going to talk to Andrew Brandt about this. When you understand the history of sports betting and NFL betting, right? And when the league was set up originally, the owners of the teams, things like that, you understand that having this sort of transparency wrought from relationships between the league, the teams, the media, and the casinos and sports books, it's not necessarily a bad thing. At the very beginning of the NFL, the founders of the NFL, two off the top of my head, Tim Mara of the Giants, New York Giants owner. His family still owns the team. Tim Mara, though, was the founding owner of the New York Giants. He was a bookie. The end. That was his gig. He didn't have anything else going. He was a bookie. And Art Rooney, the original Art Rooney, the first Art Rooney, there probably is not a more inveterate gambler in the history of the United States of America than Art Rooney. He spent his honeymoon at the racetrack every day. Whenever he did the owners' meetings, I remember Art Rooney when he was like 70, 80 years old, he always had to go to the track or he was somewhere, where he could do some wagering. So that's the history of the end. I mean, there's so many controversies that have gone on involving sports betting and the NFL over the years. And so that's why you have the NFL pushing back initially against the state of New Jersey, trying to avoid having sports books set up there because they're trying to maintain this at least superficial appearance of propriety for obvious reasons. I just gave you a couple of them. You didn't know that about Art Rooney. You didn't know that about the Mara family. They were grounded in gambling and betting, right? As was sports, I would say. I don't want to put a date on it, but I would say up until about 1960. So that's something that we'll talk about with Andrew Brandt later at length about what's happening with Josh Shaw, because I think that's really important, how they're treating him right now and what he did. And then that treatment, is that fair? Is that equitable? But first, we're going to go out to Boston and talk to Chad Finn of Boston.com, the Boston Globe, sports media columnist, and catch up what's going on in one of, along with New York, I think the two best sports media markets in the country. Chad, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Brooks. Anytime.
So on my Twitter today, I said the NBA ratings, because people can't stop talking about them. At least some people seem to not be able to get away from the NBA ratings and how they continue to come down. And I know it's a legitimate story, but I want to run this past you. I tweeted it earlier today. The NFL, except for Monday Night Football, is on over the air, right? Sure. Whereas the NBA is by far primarily on cable. So you have the core, and we know ESPN wants to move Monday Night Football from ESPN to ABC. So with the NBA being on cable and with cord cutting, and then when you look at ESPN, which is most prominent, well, along with TNT and Turner in the NBA, but with ESPN being so prominent with the NBA, but they're cannibalizing cable subscriptions with ESPN Plus, just exacerbating the cord cutting. how can you? I mean, is that not a major factor in the NBA ratings going down?
Yeah, that's definitely a factor. I mean, what's ESPN in 110 million homes? It's something like that, which it's not everything. You know, it's not what NBC is in, what ABC is in, you know, what the networks are. So immediately they start at a disadvantage, and TNT in particular, which is in even fewer homes in terms of just getting their product out to potential viewers. But you know, I think the bigger issue is probably a pretty fundamental one. It's the Golden State Warriors are terrible this year, and that was sort of what the NBA has been built around the last couple of years. Steph Curry, Kevin Durant being there when he was kind of having a marquee team like that with quasi-rivals with the Cleveland Cavaliers when LeBron was there, and then, you know, the Houston Rockets to some degree. And they don't really have that now. It's a pretty balanced league, but a balanced league isn't always good for ratings because you need sort of that Goliath for other teams to be able to take their shot at. And the NBA just doesn't have that right now. It's not unexpected. Once Steph Curry got hurt, I think ESPN and TNT probably realized something was going to happen like this.
So you are saying that the ratings, and I agree with you, are predicated on, you know, situations within the league year over year, which doesn't necessarily bode well for the league. So when the league is looking at these potentially radical changes in the scheduling and floating things out through the media with the tournaments and whatnot, do you think the league is overreacting, or do you think they're taking the proper course?
This tournament thing has been around for a while. Adam Silver brought that up in a seminar with Bill Simmons at Sloan last year, where he it's not the first time he's mentioned it, but it's the first time he's dug into it, where he's talked about how the European soccer leagues have this and it's huge. And if there were a way to A, get the players to really buy in, some incentive for them, and B, to have it some way of balancing it off to shorten the NBA schedule to 70 games or whatever it would be. So they also get that benefit of having a shorter season, and being able to make sure that that all teams were all in on this, that they were competitive, that there was a reason for them to really care about this new in-season tournament thing, that it could really work with the NBA. And it's something Silver's had in his mind for a long time. So I think this is actually going to happen, and I have no idea what to make of it or what to expect from it in the beginning. It kind of depends what those incentives are. Is it a $20 million pool for the players, the winning teams? Is there some sort of benefit in playoff seeding? Do you get an extra draft pick? Whatever it happens to be, there's got to be something like that adds value to make these players want to do it. So it's still a lot to work out, but it's a very interesting way of sort of finagling what they already have.
So you think that's going to happen? You think that
I do.
They are going to reduce, right? So how do you think the fans are going to react? I mean, you think people will be into it, or I mean, it seems like with NBC is all in on soccer thing now, right? And more, my friends are suddenly Liverpool fans. It's all over their Twitter. So it's got a relative or something. No. And then you look at, I think one of the things that maybe people do talk about this, but there are so many European players in the league. It's unbelievable. And they're the best players in the league. Many of them are, right? Luka being the number one guy, but you got Joker out there. They're big personalities now. And that, I think, lends it to the possibility of competing, not just in different countries and sending our teams over there, but maybe competing with the actual teams now, theoretically, in these sort of tournaments. Do you think that is what we're talking about here? Eventually, that's the direction the NBA could go?
That's a really interesting thought. I hadn't thought of it, but could ultimately be a world championship to some degree. I don't think that would be anything immediate, but you look at the way, in the 27 years since the original Dream Team here now, that how the world is caught up in terms of just competitiveness in basketball. And look at what happened in the World Championships this summer, where the U.S. finished, 7th or something like that. So obviously it's a worldwide game. They're way ahead of where, the NFL, who seems to constantly be plotting to put the Jacksonville Jaguars in London, The NBA is way ahead in terms of finding those worldwide markets and actually also bringing in talent, of course, from around the world. So I think that makes sense to some degree, but that might be something for 10 years down the road or maybe 5 years or something like that, where right now it's just you establish it as an NBA thing. You have that incentive at the end of it that makes fans really care about it. There's got to be a benefit there. It's got to be 2 wins to your regular season schedule or something like that. So you win this tournament, you get 3 wins for it, and you're you add those to your total of what you win over the 70 games or something like that makes teams really say, we've got to be serious about that. And right. I think Adam Silver knows that there's got to be some real genuine benefit here for every team to go 100% on this, because otherwise it's, it could end up looking pretty bad if you've got 4 teams that actually just care about it.
That's a tough dance because
so
a lot of fans, see, this is not part of our culture. It's part of soccer culture, right? It's part of Europe and South America. It's grounded into those people for almost a century, I guess. But here, that's a foreign concept. And now you've got a fan base that's saying, even if it's a nice carrot that they're providing a winning team, the fan base might still say, especially if it's a fan base like the Lakers, we don't want to be doing that. We don't want to go over there and distract from what we're used to, what has been bred into us. Here's a big question that I don't really hear people talking about, at least yet. And I'm wondering what kind of impact this could have on the NBA. When you think about what John Skipper did in writing that gigantic check for the NBA,
right?
And I look at the salaries today, and I can't help it. I'm just too old, I guess. But I flip on the radio, my old transistor radio, right? And I'm hearing these middle of the road guys. They're making $20 million a year, and there's like 15 of those in a sports report, and so many of them are in the NBA. Now we hear about the ratings, and there's a disconnect there. So when that ESPN deal comes up, it ends. What sort of impact do you think it will have on the league? Could it be something that causes a radical problem for the NBA?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what their competition would be in terms of someone else swooping in, maybe DAZN or something like that would want to get involved. But I tend to think the league is pretty happy with its partnerships with TNT and ESPN and ABC and vice versa. It's been super beneficial to both. The whole China thing was really out of character for the NBA, because it's one of the rare times where social issues or issues that extend beyond basketball, the league has looked a little bit out of step. And that hasn't happened often. The league has really, especially since Silver took over, but when you have sort of open-minded coaches like Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, whoever, it seems like the league has really been out in front, not only in terms of social issues, but also in terms of just figuring out different ways to monetize itself and figuring out different ways to appeal around the world and to appeal to younger people. No league comes close to doing what the NBA does on social media and the way it presents its highlights and things like that. And so in a lot of ways, it's very desirable from that standpoint to the television networks, because it appeals to that young demographic. But, they've run into some of their roadblocks of their own making in recent months.
But here's the big question. Is Jimmy Pitaro going to write a check like what John Skipper wrote? I think that's the big question. Is Pitaro going to treat the NBA the way he's been treating talent?
Yeah.
The way he's been treating Paul Feinbaum.
Yeah.
Like we read about that in the big league.
Sure.
And my thought is that, yes, the ESPN people out there, they need the NBA programming. They need the fill. That's important. But I really don't, because of the ratings and because of the groundswell through the media with the ratings, that's kind of what I meant. Do you think ESPN may lowball the NBA, and that could have catastrophic financial consequences for the league and the players?
I'm surprised by that, just because of how desirable live sports are. I mean, still, it's
right.
it's the ultimate thing. You can have as many different versions of Sports Center, and Jimmy Pitaro's brought that back to being basically what it was before,
Right.
you know, in its heyday. In terms of the structure of the show, it's a highlight show again. But you look at what these upstart networks, whether you're looking at Fox Sports 1 3 years ago, you're looking at DAZN now with its boxing and then baseball and what it's trying to do. Even the league networks like MLB Network or NFL Network, the most appealing thing, and you and I know this, is live sports, the live events. You get the ratings, you get the ad revenue. It's the thing people talk about more than anything else. You know, Stephen A. Smith has his moments where he'll say something we're all talking about in this 12-hour cycle, but it's still the live events that drive everything with networks like ESPN. And, you know, maybe what ends up happening is there's not this huge dispute, or, you know, Pitaro doesn't take a hard line, but they just end up basically doing what they have now. And it doesn't become one of those situations where the price keeps going up and up and up. Maybe it's finally stabilized.
Visiting with Chad Finn, Boston.com, Boston Globe sports media columnist. Stephen A. Smith. Is Stephen A. Smith worth $10 million a year?
None of us are, man. I guess if they're willing to pay it, he's worth it. Brian Curtis for The Ringer had a fantastic story about just how he's become. He went from sort of being a punchline who lost a show there and was on his way out. He actually, God, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe about 8 or 9 years ago. He was a candidate to be a NBA writer for us at the Globe. His career was sort of in this odd cycle, and now he's back there making this huge money. And we look at him not as a clown really, but as a guy who can laugh at himself. He's changed the perception of himself. So initially, I think we took it seriously whenever he would make one of these grand proclamations or whatever. And now there's kind of a wink to what he does. And I think that's benefited him because you talk about him, but you're not talking about him in this negative light so much anymore. You're talking about him as this guy who drives the conversation in sports in a lot of different ways with his program, but also as a guy who he's kind of in on the joke now. And I don't think he was quite like that before. So it's a lot of money, but you know, he's a popular guy.
You are being way too charitable to that guy.
Not a Stephen A. guy.
Not a Stephen A. guy. I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't have talent and ability.
I think he's changed a lot.
My perception is that he is a panderer and that I don't know who's talking. When he's given an opinion on something, I don't know, you know, it's just hard to tell.
Kind of thing?
Yeah, a puppet for management. And I think it's, to a certain, I mean, I'm not trying to disrespect the guy, denigrate the guy, but it reminds me a little bit of Colin Cowherd, what he does. And I remember, let me give you a specific example. Cowherd used to denigrate wrestling all the time, but when Fox got wrestling, suddenly that stopped, right? And so the thing that bothers me about Stephen A. is a lot of these subjects that I think he's carrying the water for, or at least he's playing the other side, because Max, admittedly, is on the left side, you could say, right? To a certain extent. It's really kind of ironic, right?
Right, sure.
Yeah, so I think Stephen A. is trying to play the other side. Of course, it's the embrace debate, it's the stage discussion. What's going to be interesting, though, and I'm wondering what you think about this. As I watch him now, I don't know if you picked this up. This might just be me. He doesn't look like he's all that engaged in debating now. It looks like, and I know he does a lot of theatrics, and he's always looking down and looking around and doing this stuff.
Hamming it up.
He's almost like a boxer in a way. It reminds me of that. So I'm watching. I'm transfixed. But do you think he's going to continue in this debate format? What do you think is the future? His own show, because we've all heard rumblings that things could change for him at ESPN.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he does anything better than this. If you put him in what was the show before? He had like a studio show.
Quite frankly, yeah, it was like a talk show.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, that doesn't suit him.
Right.
This suits him. I mean, he was a good NBA writer in Philadelphia, and he was a guy who was plugged in around the league. but he struck lightning in a bottle with this cold pizza stuff, just like Skip Bayless did. They weren't the only guys who were in this world. There was all kinds of beat writers from around the country that would go on those shows, and they were the two guys who really figured out how to manipulate it and get people talking about what they were talking about. And yep, there's some hypocrisy there for sure. They're over the top. You can't really trust anything that what they're saying is authentic. You know, it's a show. They're putting on a show. And I agree with you, actually. And you jogged a couple of points in my mind with Stephen A. recent stuff. He went on there and kind of, I don't know if he did it by name, but he really kind of ripped this fantastic story that Baxter Holmes wrote about the collapse of the Lakers under Magic Johnson. It's because Magic's his guy. And then recently, he with the Nets and Kyrie Irving, which is something we talk about around here all the time, Jackie McMullen had a lot of news about that. And he was like, disregard that. Kyrie's going to be fine. 3 weeks later, he's like, I'm hearing rumblings. Kyrie's not great behind the scenes. So, though he changes with the wind, but you know where he's coming from. And it's purely entertainment. I don't think anybody looks at him as a journalist anymore. And I can't see him in a different role than the one he's in right now.
I could just hear Richard Deitch, by the way, just his echoing in my. I don't know what he would be saying, but he's saying something probably off color or an expert, bleep, because you invoking entertainment. I agree with you 100%. We're at a point now where we've never been so. This is my opinion. We've never been so far over on the entertainment, cotton candy, fluff side in the history of ESPN. Right?
Right.
Is that where we are?
Yeah, I mean,
what does that say?
It's the cliche, the E stands for entertainment. It's the first letter in their name. But Bob Lee was there from what day? Wasn't day one. It might have been day 3.
There was a conscience there. There was a soul, a beating heart there to a certain extent. I felt that.
Yeah.
I don't feel it anymore.
Place. And, E60 and things like that. But it's been overwhelmed by the entertainment aspect. And it's because the entertainment aspect draws more numbers, more talk, reaction from people like us, for better or worse. So I can't necessarily fault him for leaning that way, even though we could use all the.
I mean, it's a business decision. I think we've lost Chad, but it's a business decision, I think, at its heart for ESPN, in that, I remember Jimmy Pitaro talking about data in the interviews that he's done in the last. We might have to bring Ben Strauss of the Washington Post back on the show, friend of the show, Ben Strauss, sports media columnist. And so it really has been a case, I think, where you've taken somebody like John Skipper, who used to run ESPN for many, many years, made a lot of people a lot of money. And I think now Pitaro is looking more at the analytics, the data, probably because he has to. The reality of the situation with cord cutting, you don't have those cable subscriptions that you were counting on for the next 20 years, that cost certainty, that income, revenue certainty. You don't have that anymore. And so he's much more attuned to that. Skipper was much more of an abstract guy, coming from the magazine background as he has. Let me know if we still have Chad. I'd like to get him on a minute or two more if possible. And then coming up, we've got Pete Prisco, senior NFL columnist for CBS Sports. And then later we'll talk to Andrew Brandt, of course, former NFL executive. And he now runs the Morad Center for Sports Business at Villanova University. Very prominent guy. And I want to hear what he has to say about sports gambling. But fascinating conversation, certainly with Chad Finn at the Boston Globe, about what's great about having people on. You got to have people on. Number one is I can't cover the finer points of everything. I mean, when we're going to be talking about, let's say, the Patriots, Jesus, we've got these guys. They're unbelievable. You're inside the facility. And those guys have been there 20, 25 years. Michael Giardi yesterday, Tom Curran, you name it. So many of them. That's who we lean on this show. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert in all these things and spout out opinions and sell you my picks. I'm going to make you a lot of money and all that stuff. No, you're going to be able to get that information from people that are actually there, where you can make your own decisions, informed decisions of what you think, whether it's a bet or, I mean, we have people specifically on at times, guys from Dallas, to talk about that kind of thing. It's great. That's what we do here on Fancred every single weekday, Monday through Friday, 9 o'clock Pacific, noon Eastern time. If we don't have Chad, maybe we can, I'm happy to bring him back if we have the opportunity. If not, I'm sure we'll have him on here shortly again, because he's an essential guy you've got to have on. You know, when you say sports media columnists, there are not enough of them. And there used to be a guy in every market, at least one, growing up, where you had a sports media guy. Really crucial to have that person. It's very, very important. And it's never been more important than it is now. Because, at least from a local perspective, it's great to have a national guy, right? Richard Deitch is great. I think he's fine. You know, there's a lot of guys that are good. Chad's certainly in that national category. Kind of have to be, to a certain extent. Covering the local market, but also be aware of what's going on nationally. Because of social media and how it's connected us and what they expect you to do. And your job now, no matter what the situation is. But the reason it's so important today, and I think more important, is what I just talked about with Chad Finn. And I think it's a really important conversation that should be had. And that is, well, it's all entertainment now on ESPN. And look, to me, if you have a built-in affinity for Stephen A. Smith, great. Knock yourself out. Enjoy the show. But if you don't, I mean, and he's gotten to the point where he's really well known. So you're going to take it one of two ways. I think you're going to either take it in the way Chad talked about it. He's entertaining and he is deferential in certain situations. He's very, very nimble in certain situations, right? And he was kind of made for that format. I don't disagree with that necessarily. But what I'm looking for is, like on this show, guys, this show is a response to what's happening, what we talked about with Chad, that it's all fluff, cotton candy, right? I like talk show hosts. I think they can be funny and entertaining, but if they're not going to bring me anything that I didn't already know, or they're not going to bring something up that I already know about that causes me to look at it a different way, educates me, whatever it is, not in an educational sense, but just makes me smarter about stuff, right? That doesn't involve me doing tortured analogies and verbal gymnastics and all that stuff. No. I want substance. And so that's what we're doing. Bring you substance. Like when we're giving you background on certain topics and subjects nobody else does, or we're giving you intel, like we talk about the college football coaches. Look, I was talking about James Franklin. James Franklin did not end up as USC coach. And the reason he didn't end up as a USC coach was the contract of Clay Helton. And that's something I learned about in the last 48 hours, but we had already briefed you on that in the last 6 months on this show. Because of the onerous $20 million buyout that Clay Helton has, negotiated by CAA's Jimmy Sexton, to his credit, but a disaster. The Board of Trustees was incensed, the leadership of the Board of Trustees. In other words, Rick Caruso, the guy running the Board of Trustees and pretty much running the school at USC. And I have sources telling me that he's not going to deal with Jimmy Sexton anymore. Now, Sexton, he represents probably 60% of all the high-profile coaches now and coming up. So that might be a problem in the future. It might not last forever, that embargo. But what I pointed out on Twitter today, and mind you, 95% of the time when I bring something up, I'm going to bring it up on this show. But I just felt like I needed to address things before we went on the show, give you a little background before we went on the show. There's a guy named Wayne Hughes, who's the biggest benefactor in the history of USC. All right? And he's the founder of Public Storage. He's getting along in age, to say the least. And he is still prominent in USC circles. Well, Carol Folt, the president at USC, is new. She was brought in from the University of North Carolina to clean things up. One of the issues, and it was understandable on her part, that she targeted, one of the situations was the Board of Trustees. They had too many members. They were too old, no term limit. And so she instituted what is a typical standard situation with the Board of Trustees at a major university. She changed the rules and added age limits, term limits, right? Normal stuff, but not at USC. And that's why USC is where it is today with all the scandals and all the problems. There's no accountability. There's no term limits, no age limits. Well, Wayne Hughes is the guy, when you talk about that buyout, who could dash off a check for $20 million. He's that guy. And he's old enough that it doesn't matter. That's me talking, by the way, not him. And he is directly connected with the most prominent of USC football alumni, former players, right? And so when Carol Folt a month ago, this happened 1 month ago, instituted these new age limits on the Board of Trustees, that removed Wayne Hughes from the trustees at USC. And that removed the possibility that he might scratch out a check for $20 million, a get-out-of-jail-free card for SC to jettison Clay Helton. In the event, they've got somebody. And so when they didn't have a home run hire like a James Franklin, Franklin wasn't dying to come here. He was interested. What's fascinating to me, and I haven't seen this, Cam, maybe it's come out, but I'm not aware that James Franklin has gotten a contract extension at Penn State. A lot of times guys will use situations for a contract extension. I think it's a tell, and I reported it, and I was told by multiple sources he was the guy, right? But the fact that there's no, a contract extension at Penn State, that's a tell to me. It might be a little counterintuitive, but that it was really serious. But when it didn't happen, and you don't have anybody locked and loaded, and who's out there right now? Bob Stoops. I mean, someone that you're going to bring in, they've got to be a prominent person right now. You absolutely have to do that because there's a lot of things riding. I don't want to go through all of them. I know we're going to have Pete Prisco of I'm reading something. Give me 1 second. All right. What is the, I'm reading your message there, Cam, on the, you're talking about James Franklin. Okay. They can't offer James Franklin an extension until the school's committee on compensation meets on Friday. So we may get an extension for him. And if we do, I know I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but if we do, so much of that is recruiting. Mike Leach got an extension today. It was announced through 2024. Let me just tell you, let me cut something off, by the way. But before I do that, so the bottom line with Wayne Hughes was he's no longer on the Board of Trustees because of this age limit from the new president. It was a much needed change on the board, but you're talking about the biggest benefactor of all time at USC. All right. And so now he's not amenable to writing that check. And that's why Clay Helton's still there, still here and coming back. That's what I've been told the last 36 hours. I've talked to 2 different people about that. And I'm the one who tipped you off to Wayne Hughes months ago about his influence. And now you see it. And that's why Helton's there. And when it comes to James Franklin, if he's going to get an extension, it could be related to SC, could be related to recruiting, but Mike Leach is recruiting. Mike Leach is going nowhere. There's a reason he was at Texas Tech all those years. There's a reason he's at Washington State. And he's going to be there, probably going to finish his career out at Washington State if he keeps himself together. And that is nobody wants to hire him. He's not going to Arkansas. He's not going to Ole Miss. He's not going to USC. After a while, if you're paying attention, you don't have to have sources to see that Mike Leach is not a hot commodity as far as search firms, whale donors at big schools, and athletic directors and presidents are concerned. Now let's bring up Pete Prisco from CBS Sports, senior NFL columnist, first time on the show. So we'll hold his hand. We've got a guardrail for him, just in case. And we'll talk some NFL, what's going on around a wild world of sports. On this Thursday, I'm live in Los Angeles. We do this every weekday, beginning at noon Eastern time. Earlier, had Chad Finn on for the Boston Globe, and coming up, we'll talk to Andrew Brandt. Now, do we know anything about Adam McClintock? Just when you get to it, Cam, let me know. But when you have Pete, let me know as well. You can bring him up whenever you get the opportunity. And got some things we want to dig into. And some other things that we're going to touch on this show, hopefully when we get the chance, about sports gambling, betting. I want to talk to Pete about this as well. The Josh Shaw situation. And there we go. Hey, Pete, what's happening? You got me?
How are you? Yeah,
I'm doing great. I appreciate you coming on. Thanks for joining us.
Sure, no problem.
So, a lot going on in the NFL, as always, and that's why we're here. But I wanted to ask you, and I know you do a podcast, columns, do everything at CBS Sports, but what do you think about this situation with Josh Shaw and the fact that this guy admitted he was a football player, when he submitted his identification to make it's a little bizarre, a little strange, but then he gets suspended through 2020. I mean, what do you think's going on there?
Well, I think it's a way to send a message to the rest of the players in the league that even though it's become, more accessible, they don't want you going in and betting on games. And I understand that. The league has always had the problem with wanting people to pay attention because they gamble and saying that they don't like gambling. And that's kind of where it is. But it's getting to the point where I think, and I don't know if you agree with me, but in 10 years, we're going to have the ability to bet on games like you have the ability to play the lottery. I think it's going to get to that eventually. You walk into this, 7-Eleven or wherever and say, hey, give me a 5-team parlay for $10. I think it's going to get to that. And the NFL can talk all they want about they don't like it. And we've seen the NBA kind of embrace it a little bit. But it's going to get to that, and they will like it because it's going to bring even more people onto the scene to watch the games.
I think when the betting stuff came in and the legality of it came in, for people like me, I'm in my 50s. And we just actually played a video on the show on how the media used to treat the NFL and betting and gambling. We did a 2-minute clip from a Frontline investigation in 1989, and it was rife with all of the gangsters with the funny nicknames and the disguises. This is 1989. And 60 Minutes did the same thing around that time. It is, I really kind of can't get over. It's a little surreal now to see the NFL in its embrace. But in 10 years, do you think what you're talking about and how easy it's going to be legal everywhere, is our experience as NFL fans, will it have changed in 10 years because of all these things?
No, I don't think so. I think what it will do is it'll bring in the casual fan, the guy who goes down to the 7-Eleven and says, here, he's not going to win it, but he might take it $2 on a 10-team parlay. I think that brings that guy in a little bit. I think you'll enhance the audience. Here's the other thing. We keep hearing that all these offshore books, the guys from Australia and England, they're ready to go. Once it mushrooms, they're going to be here ready to go. And that's going to bring, what that'll bring? More advertising dollars. The NFL loves that. So I don't think it's going to change the way we watch the game. I think it will improve the audience by bringing in those casual fans, the guy who's going to put $2 down on a parlay card at the 7-Eleven.
It's funny you bring up offshore. Having done a website for a long time, I remember in the early 2000s when the offshore books were starting to make their mark in sports betting, and of course it was illegal. and so, boy, my microphone just went crazy on that. And my microphone just lost its mind. So, but I remember you talked about the money, and you hit the nail on the head. And I've been wondering about this because at that time, Pete, when I was running my website, my biggest source of revenue was the offshore books were paying me to advertise, right? Sports gambling, whatever it was. And so I've been wondering, and I want to ask you, because I haven't heard a lot of people talk about offshore in the context of legality and that it's congruent with what's happening right now. So what is going on with the offshore books? Are they going to be participating in all these things that we're talking about right now in the context of legality with the NFL?
I don't know. That's a good question, but I think I'm talking about like guys like William Hill.
Right.
They're going to come over here and
that's offshore. That's offshore.
Yeah, that's gonna come over here and they're going to establish. I've heard the biggest offshore book in Australia is looking, or the biggest book in Australia is looking to come over and do some stuff. So I do think it's going to increase. And the guys that might be in trouble is the local guy down the street. He might be the guy who gets a little bit of trouble, the bookie on the corner, because if you're the government and you're taxing all that money coming in, you don't want people going somewhere else with their money. You want them coming to you. So they might squeeze those guys a little bit. But I think it's going to get to the point where it's not taboo. It's right. See all these shows. We have shows on CBS Sports HQ where we do a sports line show every night from 6 to 7 where we talk about the lines and the totals and the over-unders. That was never the case back in the day, ever. And now I think it's viewed as more of a thing that's not nearly as bad as it was portrayed years ago.
So was this never a bad thing the whole time? And we should have been doing this a long time ago?
Well, when it becomes a bad thing, it became a bad thing when it crossed the line. For example, if somebody fixed the game, then it's a bad thing. And we've seen that play out. So you got to be careful about that. But I think the more it's legal, the less likely you are to have one of those situations. It's a bad thing when, the guy who took the bet on the corner sends two guys to give you a beating. And that was crossing the line. That's why. So, yeah, from all that standpoint, it was. But I don't think it is anymore, to be honest with you. I think it's not. I think it's going to mushroom. And the teams in the sports and the commissioners that embrace are the ones that are going to make the biggest money on it.
We're visiting with Pete Prisco. He's senior NFL columnist for CBS Sports. And I really think it's a very positive thing, the transparency. But let's look at the Josh Shaw situation. I think everybody looks at that and they find out, okay, put pro football player on the identification slip, and you're like, why would he do that? And I think when you do that, and then he just readily bets against his own team, I think that is an issue. And I think one of the things that we might be missing right now is, you just mentioned game fixing. What's to me remarkable is to look at sports history, and I've really studied sports history a lot, and that used to be a big thing. But now sports betting's never been more prevalent, never been more mainstream. And I'll give you an example. Maybe they've talked about it on the air, but I haven't heard it. The Rams-Saints situation, I haven't heard one person. That's an unprecedented thing that we will never forget, that call. It was such an unbelievable situation. Not one person has brought that up. So do you think that could be an issue just the fact that Shaw would say, yeah, I'm an NFL player, I'm going to bet against my own team, that could be a problem?
Well, but okay, let's put this out there. And I've always said this about coaches. You can't go scout another team's training camp practices legally. But if I sent my cousin over there to watch their practice like he's a normal fan and write down everything that's going on, who knows? So if an NFL player really wanted to bet on a game, couldn't he send cousin Johnny to the window and bet on the game? So I do think in the past it's gone on. There's ways around all kinds of things. I think Josh Shaw was just naive on the whole process and put his own name and his occupation on there, which he could, if he was with some buddies, he could have got the same ticket, send him to the window and go bet it for him. So I do think it's not going to get to the point where it's going to be more of an issue than it's ever been. I don't think.
I think what I'm saying is that he doesn't even know what he's doing is wrong, and what we're portraying, what's actually happening is we've made it mainstream. So if you're a player and you're young enough that you have no idea what's going on, right, and you're just seeing, wow, it's everywhere, blah 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 blah. Well, then okay, I'm going to do it, and I can still do that. I think that's kind of my issue with, the integrity of the game that the players don't even realize.
Well, fantasy football. A lot of players play fantasy football, right? And there is money involved, and money exchanges hands in a lot of fantasy leagues. So, it's something that the NFL will have to look at and maybe be more stringent in how they tell guys. But there's ways around it if they really wanted to go bet on a game. You know that. Right.
We're visiting with Pete Prisco. He's a senior NFL columnist for CBS Sports. And got to ask you about Kaepernick. Floor is yours. What do you think of what's going on here in the last month?
He should be in the league, period. And I've said that all along. He should be in the league. Should he be a starting quarterback? Maybe. But he didn't play that well. People forget that. He did not play that well at the end there in San Francisco. But he should be in the league. And I don't think there's any question about that. I respect his right to protest. I do. But at some point, you have to sit there and say, you know what? These guys want me to have this workout in this scenario. I'm an unrestricted free agent. I'm a street free agent because of, the NFL had a large part to play in that. But go do the workout. It wouldn't have killed him to go do the workout and show everybody, look, I can go play by your rules. I want to play and I want to be in the league. He should be in the league. I don't think there's any question about that. But there are certain things that no other street free agent is getting that tryout. It's him. Right. So they did. Now, has the NFL done him wrong? Absolutely. Has he had his wrong in some of this situation? Absolutely. Should he be in the league? You bet.
When I look at his situation, the thing that really sticks out is the fact that he got the waiver on Wednesday and they didn't come to any sort of communicative conclusion until Saturday from his end.
But Brooks, I'll tell you this: if another free agent sitting on the street, they called him up and said, "Hey, you're going to have a workout on Saturday for every NFL team in the league," he'd pay his own way and race to get there.
Right.
No, so I get it. The NFL had some.
No, I'm condemning Kaepernick in this case that he should have communicated. Right.
Yeah, they both have flaws.
The whole situation, the rush situation with the NFL, that's ridiculous. But the fact that he waited that long, now I recognize that waiver was different, and if it precludes litigation in the future, and he's in an interview with those NFL teams on that Saturday, and he tells them he's going to kneel, well, I think that is necessarily not that great a thing to have a different waiver where they're precluding litigation if you're going to go through that. I want to ask you, though, about another situation, what you think of this. Because we made such a big deal out of Kaepernick, obviously, in the kneeling. That's what this is kind of all about. But what about Eric Reid? How is it that Eric Reid is still kneeling and he hasn't seen any of this kind of thing? And he's a very outgoing guy who was at the workout. He was there from the very beginning. How's that happening?
Well, I think two things. I think he's perceived as being a better player at his position than Kaepernick is at his. Kaepernick kind of was the lead, and he's the face of the whole thing. So if you bring him in, everybody says, they're going to criticize the team for bringing him in. What he was kneeling about isn't what people perceive it to be that he's kneeling about. And that's the problem. It was always the problem. He wasn't condemning, the military or the flag or anything else. He was condemning, social injustices, and he's right to that degree. But there also has to be a way. Look, if my employer said to me, look, you protested social injustice and we respect that, but we don't want you doing that in the workplace anymore, I'd probably stop. Me personally, I'd probably stop. But so that's where I think the issue becomes. I respect him greatly for his opinions, and everybody in this country has a right to protest whatever they want, but it wasn't handled very well. Should he be in the league? Yes. Eric Reid's in the league because they perceive him as being a better player at his position than Kaepernick is at his, and he's also Kaepernick's the face of the whole thing.
And so Kenny Still, same thing. He's a better player at his position than Kaepernick.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but he's not the face. I think that's part of the problem. Teams are scared.
Well, Trump. I mean, he's not connected to Trump. I mean, Reid's not connected to Trump. And I think Trump is the driver, is the germination of this whole thing began with Trump.
Well, it began with Kaepernick because he's the one Trump kind of took it and ran with it. Kaepernick, by kneeling, started it.
But hold on, if Trump had never said anything, my opinion is Kaepernick would have been in the league the whole time. We wouldn't be having this discussion.
Maybe you might be right, but you don't know that. You can't say that for sure. You would to think.
Well,
that.
yeah.
But
Well, because I think Trump's criticism, I think it's because of Trump's reaction led to the other players. When that happened, that was the game changer. When other players joined in because of the reaction, their perception of Trump.
Yeah, and Trump took it like it was against the United States and the flag and everything else, and that's not what it was about. And that's why kind of the whole thing got misconstrued. But it's been a while. Should he be in the league? Like I said, there's no question he should be playing in the National Football League.
Speaking of that, Cam Newton is a very interesting case. And I could watch talk show hosts, listen to them, read stuff, and you see a lot of really varying opinions about what his future is going to be, Cam Newton. We just saw what happened with Rivera, with the owner, what he talked about, the analytics reference, right? And but my question to you is, what's going to happen to Cam Newton? And did Cam Newton have anything to do with the firing of Ron Rivera?
No, I don't think he did. And the other thing is, I think he's going back to Carolina. It depends on who the coach is, depends on the regime. But if Marnie Herney and the front office and the coach that they hire is all in step, I think that he comes back. His cap figure is only $19 million.
I'm with you.
That's cheap by NFL quarterback standards. So I do think he comes back if he's healthy. Now that's the one thing. If he's not healthy, who out there wants him? That's what I keep he's going to go here, he's going to go. If he's not healthy, the Panthers will want him. If he's not healthy, who does want him? Anybody?
Well, we got that March deadline, though, with the Panthers, and they've got to figure out, okay, is he sufficiently healthy? This Liz Frank thing, though, if you look at what that injury actually entails and you look at how other people have dealt with it, the thing about Cam Newton to me, that really defines his last couple of years is he's been playing with injuries that were much worse. Whether he was hiding them or they were wanting him to play, who knows? It sounds like he was playing through them and maybe not communicating how serious they were. But my sense is that it's not so much the beating he's taken over the years that people are portraying it that way, why he's going downhill. It's that he's really been hurt. And so if he's able to get this extended amount of time, he theoretically could come back as good as new. I mean, what's your thought on the pounding issue and all the analysis you've heard about it?
Well, he's clearly taken a beating, and we're talking about his foot and that being the issue, but he also has the shoulder issue that he dealt with last year. So you're spot on. I mean, this guy has taken a lot of hits and a lot of abuse over the years. He's a big guy and he can handle it more than most quarterbacks, but eventually it starts to wear on you. You mentioned the Liz Frank. I work with Brady Quinn, and Brady Quinn recently had surgery for a foot. It took him 3 months to get back where he could do some stuff. So
wow,
it's going to take some, and he's not playing football anymore.
That's a brutal injury.
Oh, it's tough. It's tough. Sometimes it's such a small little thing but it becomes such a big thing that you don't know if they ever get back to being who they are. And a big part of his game is running around. But from what I hear, if he's healthy, the Panthers will keep him for a year because he's $19 million. It's cheap.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say, "No, he's gone. He's not going to be back." Well, I'm on your side. I agree with you. One last thing for Pete Prisco, our NFL senior columnist for CBS Sports. We've heard, I can't believe I'm a little triggered on this one, but we're hearing Tua talk about going back. He's like, Wayne, going back to Alabama. And I don't know, did you get a chance to see the interview with Herb Street yet?
Yeah, parts of it, yes.
He's bringing up, and we played it earlier, he's going to drop to the second round? Like, in what world is Bill Belichick going to let him go to the second round? I mean, unless he's dumb enough to do something at the combine or something. So what's your thought on Tua and what he should do?
He should come out and go into the draft, period. End of story. What happens if he goes back next year and does it all over again? There's no reason to go back to Alabama. He should not even consider it. Go into the draft. He will go in the first round, provided that hip doesn't have long-term damage. And they say it doesn't. You never know. The combine doctors will dissect him and look at it. If he doesn't have long-term, and I'm talking about Bo Jackson type of hip injury, which they say he does not have, then he's going to be a first-round pick, and he should be a first-round pick. So don't go back to school. Look, I get into it. Kirk Herbstreit, I respect him greatly, but every year at this time of the year, he sends out the tweet about guys not playing in bowl games. Go compete with your teammates. If you're going to make millions and millions of dollars, do not play in an exhibition game that doesn't benefit you one bit, but benefits the school and the conference. They're exhibition games. Take care of yourself. Don't play in them.
And you know what? College football, and of course this is all about the television, it's all about ESPN. They are college football. They run college football. They could make those games meaningful if they wanted to. They choose not to. So you wouldn't have these problems. And they could compensate the players if they wanted to. So you wouldn't have the transfer problems. So college football doesn't have its whole situation good God, we could talk for like hours about this kind of stuff.
If you were Jerry Jeudy, Brooks, if you were Jerry Jeudy, would you play in that bowl game? You're going to be a top 10 pick. I'm not playing.
But I think one of the big things that's outrageous, and it reminds me of the Elijah Moore situation. We're acting like this guy just committed a crime, right? It was a celebration penalty that DK Metcalf of Ole Miss did the exact same thing for Ole Miss 2 years earlier. We showed the film. And we're acting like this guy, it's the end of the world. People columnists are saying it'll live in infamy. It sounded like FDR or something. And on top of it all, this kid's not getting compensated. He doesn't have guaranteed health care. So this is what really gets me triggered about college. I love college football. What do you think Tua projects to? Is he like a Russell Wilson kind of guy? Or
yes.
What, really?
That's your analysis is spot on. With his accuracy, his ability to get outside the pocket. Now, again, we don't know how the hip is, and will that impact his ability to get out? But he's accurate with the football. He knows where to go with the football. Now, there's going to be criticism of him. If you took and you threw to Judy, Smith, and Ruggs, and all those guys, you're going to complete a bunch of passes. So, and there's a lot of guys wide open. But I do think he's going to translate a lot like Russell Wilson on the next level. I don't know if he's going to get to that talent level and be that good, but he will translate to being successful in the NFL.
It's Prisco CBS on Twitter, man. I can't thank you enough for jumping on. This has been great.
Anytime, man. You let me know, I'll do it. You got it.
That's Pete Prisco, who's joining us, senior NFL columnist from CBS Sports. You can see him on CBS Sports HQ, which I check out, by the way, all the time. And it's great. They got a lot of great stuff on there. A lot. Amy Trask is on there, and Jason's on there, and a lot of stuff. So check it out when you get a chance. Now we're going to be joined by former NFL executive, of course, Andrew Brandt, the Oracle, the Business of Sports podcast. It's got to be in your rotation. The Business of Sports podcast. It's in my rotation. It's one of those ever-present things. You know, you have podcasts. You only have a few of them. Your podcast, Andrew, is like part of my life. It's always sitting there on my phone. And I was listening to you this morning.
Awesome.
And you got a great voice. Do people ever say that to you about your voice?
Yeah, Brooks, it's interesting because I was a DJ in college radio, and maybe you can hear me doing my jazz.
I'm a former
in Stanford University, Andrew V, Music by the Bay, things like that.
Wow. Those were the days, right?
Yeah,
so you are the executive director, Morad Center at Villanova. Exactly what is that? The executive director of the Morad Center at Villanova.
Yeah, I mean, when I left the Packers, I wanted a different life for myself and my kids. Moved back after moving my wife to rural Wisconsin for 10 years. She got to pick the next stop. So we ended up in Philly, and I wanted to do media and I wanted to do academia. And I started at Wharton, University of Pennsylvania. I was teaching there for a few years. And a guy named Jeff Morad, who's part owner of the San Diego Padres at the time, is alum of Villanova and endowed a sort of a sports law business program. And I kind of noted it in the media. And then I got a call from him. He says, I just found out you live around Philadelphia. I said, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I do. And he said, will you run my program? And I basically said, you know what? You don't want me because I'm doing all these other things. I'm doing media. I'm doing Wharton. And go get an academic that's going to be there every day. And they went away, him and the dean, and came back and said, you know what? We don't want an academic. We want someone
exactly
is more practical, has a national voice, a name. And Anyway, long story short, it's been great. So what I do, Brooks, is I run, obviously we have a pretty big curriculum, 4 or 5 sports law classes, of which I teach 2. We have symposia and speakers and events and a sports law concentration, a sports business concentration. So that's kind of my day job, is running this program at Villanova. And then, of course, I do all my other media, writing, podcasting, everything else. And I really appreciate it on the podcast because, again, what I saw in this vast podcast network was nothing that really took listeners inside kind of the depths of the game, primarily football, but other sports too. And if you listen, I did one in the holiday week on Thanksgiving, just more about all these kids contact me every week. How do I get in? What should I do? Should I go to law school? Should I go to business school? How do I get a job? What do I say? What do I do? So I kind of put it out there. So people are interested in getting into sports as a young person, transitioning as a professional in another business, coming from media, coming to media. I encourage you to listen to that podcast, The Business of Sports, the one last week, and before we got to this week's one about gambling.
What do you think about the state of sport or football agenting in lieu of private equity coming in with CAA, and you've got all of the business aspects now of WME? You can't pick up Wall Street Journal with finding out what Endeavor and Shapiro is doing. I mean, has it changed? Like from when Ken Kramer and Condon first went to CAA to now, how is it different?
Yeah, it's so funny because I've seen these evolutions. I was negotiating with Tom and Ken when they were doing that, when I was at the Packers years ago, and now we've seen all these different iterations, and now PE's coming into LaGuardia, coming into all these big firms. Full disclosure, Brooks, I'm kind of in the industry now again myself. Gary Vee, the superstar entrepreneur, sports agency, and has me kind of advising, consulting with he. And that's not private equity. That's more this fantastic entrepreneur that decides.
Angel investor.
Yeah, exactly.
Love him on Twitter, by the way.
Yeah, and he's got such a following. So I think it's changed in the fact that it is, what do I talk about? The business of sports. So these agencies are part of that, where they're buying agents who are now put on salaries, but they're reaping all the benefit from having the players and then using their, what's the word? It's their synergy with entertainment, with other opportunities to really get these guys deals that they can flow through. Because I know every athlete is really looking for, what can you do for me beyond the standard sports agent that just gets the contract, gets the Nike deal when they call and give you $25,000. So I think that's what everyone's looking for, and that's what these firms are trying to do.
Is that, and I see like a Steph Curry doing his television show, these game shows or these kind of ad hoc shows that they put together. Is it really different today that these players are actually getting more opportunities through that synergy, through that leveraging, or is that a pitch?
I think it is. But again, you're talking about the top guys. LeBron has the show, Steph has the show,
right? Some
of the superstars, but you do see more on kind of the entrepreneurial front.
Gronk is a great example.
Gronk, yes. And speaking of Steph, Andre Iguodala is a real example who's done a lot of venture investing and is really taking a lot of meetings about where to put his portfolio. And that's kind of the new breed of athlete. People are doing that right and left now. And I get calls from people saying, we want to get to athletes. And I'm like, listen, I'm not that person. I'm not going to be the broker. But people are trying to get to athletes because of the obvious. What do they bring? They bring cachet, they bring sexiness, they bring glamour. They make you appear to be in a higher level of the entertainment world if you associate with, pick a name, Andre Iguodala, Steph Curry, of course, LeBron. Their businesses. And then, of course, Kevin Durant and his agent, Rich Kleiman, have their own show now, The Boardroom, through ESPN. There's another level to that.
I personally love it. I love that these guys are getting these direct relationships with the public, and they have this free, incredible, multi-billion-dollar marketing that's going on through the leagues and broadcasting and us media.
Yeah.
And it's finally starting to come to fruition. Visiting with Andrew Brandt, And I wanted to get to the Josh Shaw situation because, and we just talked to Pete Prisco, senior NFL columnist from CBS Sports, and to me, it really is a sign of what's happening in that Josh Shaw bets against his own team at Caesars, a high-profile book, right? Identifies himself as an NFL player. If that doesn't speak to how the media treats gambling, then it wouldn't occur to him that maybe you shouldn't be doing that. I think that really points to a potential problem when you embrace gambling the way the media has.
That's a great point. There's so much to unpack here. I've done a podcast about it with Dave Purdom, the ESPN gambling guru.
I heard that, yeah. I listened to it this morning.
Yeah, and I'm going to write about it for Sports Illustrated because I've been covering for 5 years the unrolling of gambling on the NFL stage.
Yeah.
And a quick background for everyone, they fought it for 7 years in court against the state of New Jersey, Chris Christie, trying to implement sports betting. They fought it because of the big word, integrity. We can't have gambling. You go back to Pete Rose, you go back to Alex Karras and Paul Hornung, because it strikes at the heart of the integrity of the NFL, so they can't have it. Meanwhile, they are putting a team in Vegas. They are aligning with fantasy at all levels, FanDuel and DraftKings, sponsorship deals right and left. And, of course, they're allowing teams to have at the Packers, our team stayed in a hotel every Saturday night before home games at the Radisson, which was next to the Oneida Casino.
Think about Paul Hornung again.
I know.
You invoke that name. People don't know the story, but it's unbelievable.
It's right there. I lived on Oneida Nation land when I lived there. And, of course, one of our big sponsors I did deals with was the Oneida Casino, who had tons of money. MGM has a deal with the Lions. I mean, anyway, all this mixed message. But, of course, the NFL loses at the Supreme Court May 14th. I'll never forget it, 2018. And basically, floodgates opened. And now we have, at this moment, 12, count them, 12 states led by New Jersey that have legalized. So, spinning to Josh Shaw, he goes to a casino. Now, he's in the one state that already had it, which is Vegas, at Caesars, which is now the NFL's official casino, and lays down a bet and lays down a parlay. And, of course, the kicker, as Dave Purdom reported, was that it was against, not for, against the Cardinals, one of those three plays. And, of course, he's caught because I was confused by that, too. I guess in his card, to get even a player's card, he writes down professional football player. Now, here's the thing. Year and a half, right? Half of 19, all of 20. You heard me on the podcast. There are domestic abusers.
Dude, it is way over the top.
This is 6 games. Greg Hardy got 6 games. I mean, and of course, whatever you think of Tom Brady, 4 games. But 2 years?
Let me tell you. You know what really struck me is when you talked about the Packers staying at a casino resort.
Yeah.
They're staying there. And then you have this kind of a situation with Josh Shaw. If you're Shaw, you're his agent or his attorney. You sure, to me, this is a no-brainer appeal, legal action. There's no way the NFL can get away with that. That's my opinion.
It's on appeal. And I said to Dave, of course this is being appealed. Now, he sort of mentioned something about, the appeal is something he misinterpreted the Supreme Court decision, which is basically probably saying, hey, I thought everything was legal. The Supreme Court, quote unquote, legalized gambling.
It's federal, yeah.
But as you know, it's just like marijuana. People ask me,
California,
out here, California, can players in Washington, can players in Colorado light up? And I'm like, no, because NFL law trumps state law. And the NFL law on gambling is you can't gamble. Now, it seems like it's out of date and archaic and old school compared to where society is, but it's where we are. And Josh Shaw is paying the price. It's just interesting that this is a no-name guy on IR. That's the test case for this. It's just weird.
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a test case.
Yeah.
I think you have to look at it from a legal perspective. At least maybe not literally in this case, but why not? If the NFL is going to double down and be draconian. If this guy was a star, how do you think they'd be treating him?
Yeah, I mean, that's my question. Would it be less or more? And I could argue either way.
I would say less, and they would use it as an educational opportunity. Remember, we talked earlier, this is just my thought on it. I mean, how can you be staying at that hotel and that casino resort? How can you turn on ESPN and they have shows devoted now?
Yeah.
It's so, I mean, Fox Sports, News Corp, or whatever the parent company, they have their own sports book. And the guy identifies himself as a pro football player. Why wouldn't he? You've got a Supreme Court decision. Why wouldn't he?
Well,
so to me, this is an educational opportunity to go. And I wanted to ask you, by the way, Andrew, does the NFLPA really spell this out, or the team spell this out in some sort of preseason seminar? I mean, how does that work in terms of gambling, what you can and can't do?
I don't remember it around our team. I remember them coming in and talking about drugs and all this.
But not gambling.
Not gambling. You know, it's funny because I'll give you a story. This is probably 10, 12 years ago. We're at the end of training camp, and I'm sitting around with coaches and execs on the Packers. And we decide, like everyone in America, we're going to have a fantasy draft. Okay?
Right.
So it's going to be coaches and execs and 2 rules, which we had to have, which are number 1, no money, and number 2, no Packers. Can't draft our own players. Okay, so I then call, and then I'm in the back of the room, and I say, I got to call the league. And they're like, Andrew, don't call the league.
You're that guy, Andrew. You're that guy. I'm glad we know.
I said,
don't say anything about Andrew.
Yeah, so I call the league, and I'll share this conversation, which is very brief. NFL legal guy I dealt with. I said, okay, here's the deal. We're going to have a fantasy draft, scouts, execs, maybe a coach or 2, assistant coaches, like quality control, no placards and no money. Can we do it? Pause. He says, we didn't have this conversation. I'm like, what? He said, how you doing? How's your family? I said, okay. So
it's like cloak and dagger kind of stuff.
Even a fantasy draft 10 years ago was like, ooh, that's scary. So now just everything you pointed out is how much it's changed. And of course, I started with this. They have put a franchise in the mecca of gambling in this country. Now, if they think Josh Shaw is an isolated example, I mean, every team's going to be going through there now. And what do you think they're going to be doing in their off time? I mean, come on. So I suggested to Purdom, and I have talked about this for years. When I was at ESPN, we did a show on this where I think there's got to be a CGO, right? So the league has a CEO, CIO, COO, CMO, CGO, Chief Gambling Officer, that really has, I would think, comes from Europe, where they've been doing this for 20 years and has a background in integrity for sports gambling. They need that because, yeah, I mean, this is going to happen over and over, I think.
Well, and you know what? We're to me, the psychology of this reminds me of a Wall Street bubble when we have a game that is fixed, or we have something where we are able to see evidence that the game was manipulated. Then we're going to have a nuclear explosion when, if you have what you're talking about, you get in front of it and you don't want to keep it. See, I think the NFL just wants to shut down any and all conversation,
right.
But that's the old way of looking at it. The key to me, the key piece here is the media. The media is everything. And now that they're not only endorsing this, but they're part of it financially themselves, that's everything. That said, you don't want to get blindsided when something inevitably happens. And the only way to do that is to address it publicly from a league perspective.
Yeah.
And they're not doing that.
You know that we just keep talking about this. Josh Shaw has to be a reasonably intelligent person. And he feels comfortable going to Caesar's Palace and writing he's a pro football player and making that bet. So I really don't think he was doing something like, oh my God, I hope I don't get caught.
Look, I don't think he's stupid. I think that's really unfair, because the people who are calling him stupid work in a media where their company is signing off with hour-long shows and putting up the odds and the over, and that guy's stupid. That's really, really unfair. But it speaks to how the media itself, there's no talk of impropriety at all. Zero. There needs to be. And we ran a clip earlier on the show today from PBS. They did this big expose in 1989 about the NFL and gambling and all that stuff. And that's not going to happen through the sports media. It's going to always have to happen through the non-sports media. I want to ask you that we're visiting with Andrew Brandt. Just one more thing before we let you go. I really appreciate your time.
Of course.
But you mentioned the minor league baseball thing with Bernie Sanders, and he's engaging Rob Manfred. First of all, it reminds me a little bit of like when Army bases close. It's like the politicians want to jump in and address that. And I'm a longtime minor league baseball announcer. I did it for like 6 years. But when it comes to politics and what you're seeing from Bernie Sanders in doing that, how do you feel about that? What's your thought on that? A politician taking that on directly?
Yeah, and I think that. I don't know if Rob Manfred would entertain a normal congressman on this issue, but here's a front runner for the Democratic nomination. And to update everyone, there's 40 minor league cities the Major League Baseball is planning on closing, ostensibly to apply those resources towards the existing ones that would be better run, better managed, and better facilities. And Bernie Sanders, we assume from Burlington, Vermont, is one of those that may be closing because he represents that. My point is always this, and you mentioned it with the Navy bases. It's like people have this problem with sports and politics mixing. It's inextricable. I mean, they're so connected. They're always connected. I mean, half of what I did in Green Bay outside the football team was dealing with local politicians. I mean, because we got to get things done. You got to work with who you're there. There's a lot of people in sports that do nothing but deal with local politics because you got to get a land lease, you got to get an easement, you got to get this. People don't own stadiums, very few. So all of that's going on. I totally understand what Sanders is doing. I guess my cynicism is that Rob Manfred is giving him face time and cover. But at the end of the day, especially if Sanders doesn't win the nomination, that's going to close. He's going to do what he's going to do.
I've been studying for a project I've been working on, politics and football. And I looked back at the story, and you probably know the story about back in 1905, 1906, a bunch of football players were dying because they didn't have the forward pass. The game wasn't opened up. And what ends up happening in 1905, I was just reading this yesterday in some of the old newspapers. Teddy Roosevelt, the president, his son was playing for Harvard. And because of his son suffering, 26 players were killed in 1905, but that had been going on, and there was no sign they were going to change the rules. But when the president's son was involved, he was hurt twice playing for Harvard. Teddy Roosevelt hauls Walter Camp into the White House and does it twice.
Wow.
Along with the coach of Harvard, and tells them, change the effing rules. I don't care what you do. So initially, Walter Camp, who's totally against the forward pass, says, let's widen the field 40 feet. One permanent stadium in the United States at that time. It's the very first concrete permanent stadium that was ever built since the Coliseum. It's Harvard Stadium. Bill Reed's the coach, right? So they go over to Harvard Stadium with a tape measure, and Harvard Stadium's playing surface is too narrow, so they can't widen the field. And so Roosevelt tells them, put the forward pass in. And that's the only reason we have the forward pass today.
That's amazing.
You talk about politics.
Yeah.
Jesus.
That's just
unbelievable.
What a story. Wow.
It is. It's an amazing story. That Harvard Stadium, that without that stadium existing, one thing I did mention was when they were having that meeting, because of all the deaths, Stanford, Cal, Columbia, and Harvard had all voted to drop football at that moment. And the media was a big part of that. But so that's an amazing example of, I mean, to me, it's a red herring. Anybody who says the word politics, especially from the perspective of a Jimmy Pitaro of ESPN, to me, it's just a way to control everything someone says on the air. That's really what it comes down to.
That's a great point. Great story.
I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, man. Look forward to having you back. Stay in touch.
Always enjoy, Brooks. Talk soon.
That's Andrew Brandt, of course, Executive Director of the Morad Center at Villanova in Philadelphia. Longtime NFL executive with the Packers, was there for Favre, Rodgers. He helped manage that whole situation with Favre and Rodgers. What a situation that was. Talk about, that'd be a great movie. Or has anybody done a documentary on that? It seems like we've got documentaries. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a sports documentary, right? A great documentary would be, and Andrew would probably be the star, the interplay between Favre and Aaron Rodgers, how that played out, how it worked out. Just that, focus on that transition. And because Andrew, if you listen to his pod, and he's been on the show, he's talked about it on the show, it's a remarkable situation. And, knowing what we know about Favre's personality and what happened, what he did, going to the Vikings, and, the hated Vikes from the Packers, and knowing what we know about Rodgers' personality, incredible. So he was able to manage that, get through it, get those rings, right? That's who we're talking to. No better person to talk to. I just think of the punishment that Josh Shaw was given a whole season next year when he identified himself. And people are dumping on him today like he's a dummy. A dummy. I don't know how old he is, but if you're real, you don't have any idea about the history and the forbidden nature, the taboo nature of sports betting. Why would you? You've got Terry Bradshaw going on Fox, nothing against Terry, but take my money. And Fox has their own sports book. ESPN has their own place inside Caesars now, their own studio, right? I mean, there's really too many things to name. Too many things to name. And the whole discussion about the Saints and Rams, which has had a big impact on the NFL with this charade of the pass interference replay this year. So it's had a big impact on the league. I mean, no one has talked about how weird that play was. The no call, and nobody does anything. Very strange. In a normal situation, like he brought up a great point, the CGO, right? The chief gambling officer. If the NFL had that, because the media is not going to do anything. They're going to go along for the ride. They've already signed off on sports betting. Mind you, this whole conversation is a positive conversation. I think everything that's happening right now is actually very positive about sports betting. More transparent, more integrity, and more opportunity to do it if you want. I think that's great. It's great. But if you don't address the potential impropriety, you get Josh Shaw saying, "Oh, I'm an NFL player. I'm going to bet against my own team." He doesn't even know. He doesn't even know. And so that tells you the league has to do something. The media is not going to do anything. The media is contributing to him thinking that's cool, right? And of course, I was shocked to hear Andrew say the league doesn't do any presentation on gambling. That's another thing, right? You got to do that, but you have to have it. It reminds me of, when you're inoculated for something. What do? They put a tiny bit of something into you, right? To protect you against a disease, they give you a tiny, tiny bit of that disease so you can build up an immunity to it. I'm not saying you should be immune to the prospect of game fixing, But you have to have that out there. And in baseball, it really defines baseball, at least it used to when I was in baseball. Any clubhouse, anywhere you walk in, they had the same big poster board up that said no gambling and had all these rules. In every clubhouse in America, major and minor league. And that situation there is a response to a game in baseball that was invented by gamblers, for gamblers. And the dirty little secret, read the book, Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty. It's called Ty Cobb, A Terrible Beauty. And that book lays out that baseball was fixed through 1930. It was very common. Almost every game, somebody was doing something. And when you go back and you look at games now from that era, if you ever did, and you say, wait a minute, that guy fell down in left field. Wait a minute, this pitcher all of a sudden walked 4 guys in a row? Or on the last day of the season, here's an example. This is when it comes to gambling in baseball and why baseball addressed it the way it has and football hasn't. On the last day of the season, one year, this happened. Ty Cobb was going to win the batting title. He was like 7 or 8 points ahead of Napoleon Lajoie of the Indians, Cobb of the Tigers. And so Lajoie is playing a double header. It's like 7 points behind Cobb in the batting race. Now, people are betting on that, in case you don't know, back then. And so Lajoie is playing for the Indians. They're playing the St. Louis Browns, the last game of the season, last 2 games of the season, doubleheader. And he goes like 7 for 8. And all the hits are bunts, bunt hits. So the American League president and the commissioner hauls the Browns in, hauls the manager, and has a big investigation. It's all hushed up, covered up. But that's an example of why baseball addresses it the way it does today, and that explains a little bit of why Pete Rose has been treated the way he has been treated, continued. But, you know, like somebody like Josh Shaw, who the hell is Pete Rose, right? Who the hell is Ty Cobb? What are you talking about? Game fixing, what's that? Literally, what's that? Because it's like, you know, the NFL, if you could think of the atom bomb against the NFL, if there was one, it would be the perception that the game lacks integrity and how it's played. And so you can understand why the NFL is so sensitive about it, right? But I think Andrew has the right approach. You've got to be more upfront about it. It's also a little bit like, I wouldn't treat it this way, but the way the NCAA does it, or at least the way college football does it, but the NCAA does it, they oversee it. You have these compliance departments, which are really phony below, inside all of the schools. School employees are there in their own compliance department to enforce the rules. If I was the NFL, I don't know if I'd have a guy for each team, but I would have some sort of public organization that could be out there to give the sense of propriety. Because if you don't do that, and I'm just telling you, it's not going to come from the sports media. This is not unprecedented. It's happened. If the FBI gets involved, if law enforcement gets involved, and that's what happened to the University of Kentucky when Adolph Rupp, and the Kentucky basketball program was given the death penalty because the FBI stepped in, federal judges stepped in, and they got blown out. Actually, it was 1 year. So enough of that. We do this every day, Monday through Friday. Back tomorrow. Great guests already lined up tomorrow, as usual. I'd like to thank our producer, Cam Smith. Great job. And our guest today, Pete Prisco, joined us today. Chad Finn joined us today from Boston Globe. Pete Prisco, senior NFL columnist from CBS Sports. And you just heard from Andrew Brandt, friend of the show. Sounds like Pete's a friend of the show now. Great guy. That was a really good conversation. And we'll have more, and I'll have more on the college football coaching carousel tomorrow. More stuff that you don't. Listen, if I bring something up, you haven't heard about it. That's why I'm bringing it. I don't have anything like that. But we get to it, and we'll get to it at the top tomorrow. So join us tomorrow here on Fancred. Pass the word. All right? The mobile streaming platform. We'll do more of that coming up. For Cam Smith, our producer, from Los Angeles, I'm Brooks Melchior saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.